Live from Washington, D.C., this is a Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. Race relations moving beyond.
Good evening, everyone. I am Bernice A. King, and I'm here to introduce what is guaranteed to be an intriguing and thought-provoking dialogue between intellectual and caring people of different races, genders, and backgrounds. Today is an opportunity to delve into a conversation in which our town hall panelists and the audience can participate in an exchange. An exchange where we seek solutions and move beyond discourse regarding race relations in this great country that we call the United States of America. Coming from a family that has experienced gun violence twice, my father was assassinated when I was just 5 years old, and my grandmother was shot in church when I was merely 11 years old. I know the depth of the pain and the sense of loss in situations like Michael Brown. I extend my condolences to the Brown family and the family of Tamir Rice, whose loved ones' lives were tragically taken at the hands of excessive police force. I also wish to extend my condolences to the family of Eric Garner, whose life was also lost at the hands of excessive police force in Staten Island. When I spoke to a group of students at the Riverview Gardens High School outside of Ferguson, Missouri in late August, I conveyed to them that anger is anger. It has no mind. It has no rationality. It's mad and it just wants to destroy. At the end of the day, you have to find a way to arrest that anger. Gathering here today is a great step in banding together as a community, because only solutions can move us forward. Thank you very much for being a part of an important dialogue during what is truly an important weekend for all Americans to observe and reflect upon, the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday.
Joining our town hall panel, Dr. Ben Carson, Republican presidential hopeful and world-renowned pediatric surgeon. Benjamin Crump, attorney for the families of Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin. From Las Vegas, Nevada, Frederick Wilson, the producer of a viral video about race in America. And journalist Patricia Guadalupe.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us for this National Town Hall about race relations in America. We are reporting live from D.C. tonight and streaming nationwide. I'm Jeff Barn. We'd like to thank our panel for being here, Dr. Ben Carson, Benjamin Crump, Frederick Wilson, and Patricia Guadalupe. And we'd also like to welcome our studio audience, who will be interacting and asking a lot of questions throughout the hour about a very volatile topic, especially after what we saw last year. You at home can interact as well. We hope to hear from you. Join the conversation by using the hashtag #YourVoiceYourFuture. Our goal tonight, as you just heard, is to find very constructive solutions after what has been a very tumultuous year for race relations.
Martin Luther King Jr., a major advocate of civil rights and peaceful protests, would have been 86 years of age last week.
I have a dream.
In late August 1963, Dr. King spoke directly to the American conscience that all men were created equal, but not treated as equal.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
45 years later, after one of the greatest speeches ever, an African-American is elected President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States faithfully.
Americans undoubtedly reached a turning point in its never-ending and often terrifying struggle with the issue of race. But a mere 6 years after the historical election of President Barack Obama, the problem with race lingers, especially last summer in the cities of New York and Ferguson, Missouri. Last year, the deaths of 2 unarmed black men at the hands of police triggered an explosive new showdown. Eric Gardner, held in a deadly chokehold by officers in New York City. Michael Brown, shot to death in Ferguson, Missouri. Both of them were unarmed. In both cases, the police officers were cleared by a grand jury. Once again, civil unrest causing a vigorous and sometimes fiery debate about law enforcement relations with African Americans nationwide.
Let freedom ring.
It's something to ponder how Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would have responded to these events if he were still alive. But his charismatic presence is long gone. An advocate of peace, gunned down in his prime, Memphis, Tennessee, at the Lorraine Hotel, April 4th, 1968. It clearly shows all of us that we still have a long, long way to go.
And before we get to the panelists and our audience questions, let's head down now to our newsroom where our Jumi Olabanji is monitoring the conversation right now on social media nationwide. Jumi, what are you finding?
Well, Jeff, we have just been online right now here. You can see we've got the board here. We want to discuss with you, not just here in Washington, but really all across the country. We want your questions this evening. You can tweet us using that hashtag, Your Voice, Your Future. You can ask from all over the country, either to one of our panelists or a question to the entire panel. We'll be down here in the newsroom all evening long this hour, checking in on what the questions are. We'll send them back upstairs to you as soon as we get them. But we've also got, Jeff, people who are asking questions off air as well and offline. And we've got one of those questions for our panel right now.
Hi, my name is Kevin Berry, and I'm from Portland, Oregon. And my question for the panel is, with all of the racial tension that we have had with the situation in Ferguson with Mike Brown and the situation in New York with Eric Gardner, and so much of white America does not believe that there is injustice, how do we go about, or how would you go about in getting that across, that there is injustice when it comes to profiling of black people, Hispanic people, and others in these situations, and how do we make it so that the police are accountable for their actions in these situations where it's not such a common thing to occur?
Well, there you have it, Jeff. Seems like a two-part question there. Looking forward to what our panelists have to say about that one. We'll check back in with you a little later on this hour for any other questions coming into the newsroom. Jeff?
Jumi, thanks so much. We certainly hope to hear from you all over the country, because on this Martin Luther King Day, this is a very important topic. So our panelists first, let me pose the first question. This being Martin Luther King Day, Martin Luther King delivering his speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in August of 1963, he had a dream. And he paid for it with his life. Benjamin Crump, let me go to you first. What do you think needs to be done to close the gap between the races in this country so that racism at best can be minimized?
Well, when we look at not just the situation in Ferguson and New York, which are very poignant questions, but we look at the broader spectrum on race in America and how we have certain people in this country, whether black, brown, or Asian, feel like they're part of the American society. We have to say, what is it that divides us? And I have come to three things that we really have to focus on, and that is education, economy, and elections, because those three things more than anything else can allow minority communities to fully participate in achieving the American dream, and they all beget one another. Education is predicated on having a stable economy, but a stable economy is predicated on having people being educated. And then elections are so vitally important because the government policy and leadership perpetuates both education and economic policy in every community. So those are the things that we have to have more participation on from the minority communities, those three E's: education, economy, and elections.
Benjamin, thanks so much. I'd like to turn this now to Patricia Guadalupe, who was nice enough to be with us, a journalist from D.C. right here. A lot of times the Hispanic population in this country seems to be overshadowed with the black-white debate as far as race is concerned, but it is also hurting in the Hispanic community nationwide. from what you see and what you report on.
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I think is a mistake is to assume that it is just a black and white issue. I mean, Hispanics can be white Hispanics, black Hispanic, Asian Hispanics. I mean, I think what Mr. Crump is saying is absolutely true, that a lot of the groups don't work together enough, and that we in the community feel a sense of frustration when something happens. And then you see the aftermath of that with all the violence on the street, which perpetuates a stereotype of how you're supposed to react to these things. But a lot of times people are just angry about what's going on because they feel that they don't have a say in what is going on. And a lot of it is because we don't have a lot of groups that are working together. We don't have a lot of Latino groups working with the African American groups. And other minority groups. I mean, everybody has their own little, almost like their own little clubs and their own little gatherings and their own little cliques. And it's a lot of, we need to work together a lot more than we are right now, because I think that there is a sense of frustration all around, and that's because there's a lack of coordination and a lack of participation.
I've seen a lot of media outlets report just on both races, and this one seems to be left out, and that in itself is a form of racism, that you are negating a whole race of people who were born and raised here, who are American citizens, doing their best, trying to work, getting the best education they possibly can. Now we're going to get to Dr. Benjamin Carson in just a few minutes, but first I would like to introduce you to Frederick Wilson. Now, we're joined by Frederick Wilson on the panel, Frederick Wilson II, who became a YouTube overnight sensation after posting this video. And it's very entertaining, but very informative, and it's inflaming to a lot of people. Let's take a listen to that clip.
If you live in a messed up neighborhood, let me give you a little advice. Stop messing it up. Ain't no rich white man sneaking into the hood in the middle of the night, spray painting graffiti, peeing in hallways. George Bush ain't out in the neighborhoods selling crack on the corner. You know what I'm saying? If your neighborhood is messed up, it's because the people in the neighborhood continually mess it up.
All right, so now you've been introduced to our guest, Frederick Wilson, and it goes on and on and on. And we certainly appreciate you coming here, because you've had over, as of yesterday, I counted this, 1,051,300 hits.
Wow.
You have 22,000 likes, 700 dislikes. So it's like you knocked it out of the park. And the count was 3-2. You had 3 guys on the bag, and there were 2 out. So thank you so much for being on the panel.
You're welcome.
Dr. Benjamin Carson, before we get to our first audience member who's waiting very patiently for a question to ask you, from what you've heard so far in the first few minutes of this broadcast, what do you think needs to be done? You're a potential presidential candidate. I mean, you may be running for president. What would you do to tamp down the rioting, to tamp down possibly the grand jury system, our law enforcement system, and maybe close the racial gap between police and the communities they serve? What's your response, Doctor?
Well, I think we have to talk to both sides on this. We have to talk to both the police and we have to talk to the communities, because both of them have to accept some degree of humility. And what that means, they both have to agree that they're not perfect, and that maybe there are some things that can be done on either side. You know, maybe the police can adopt some different techniques or use body cams or a combination of things, but just listen to some of the ideals. And I know a lot of them are willing to do that. The community, on the other hand, also has to be willing to admit that everybody in that community is not an angel, is not perfect, and that we do have laws and we do have law enforcement. And that's the first step. Make those admissions, because there's plenty of fault to go around. But I was talking to Ed Mullins, who's the president of the Sergeants Benevolent Association of the NYPD the week before last, who really is looking for solutions, been working with Reverend A.R. Bernard and some other community leaders out there. And I think they've happened upon something that really makes a lot of sense. Starting some athletic leagues in New York City with the police and the community together so that they get to know each other. Because what I've discovered over the course of life is people who have a lot of animosity toward each other, when they actually get to know each other, all of a sudden the horns disappear and the fangs retract. You know, that's what we need to do. We need to create a relationship between people, because you're always going to have suspicion when that person is a stranger.
Okay, Frederick, the YouTube sensation, the overnight rock star, the guy's going to have an album out. You have agents calling you all over the time. You don't get any sleep. What I'd like to ask you is this following question. There are a lot of communities who say, why can't we have a police force that looks like the community they serve? And an FBI estimate says you have a lot of cities in this country where it's disproportionately, the majority are white police officers, and the residents they're protected to serve are those people who are of color. So, and the top three, interestingly enough, by the FBI is New York, where you had the Eric Gardner case, St. Louis, Missouri, not far from Ferguson, and Cleveland, where this 12-year-old kid was shot after a cop arrived at the scene with just 2 seconds to make up his mind, and the kid had a toy gun and he shot him. How do you feel about this closing of the racial gap between the police and the community they serve?
I definitely think that's hugely important, kind of picking off of what they were talking about. It's about understanding. I mean, if you have a predominantly white police force enforcing a minority community, those officers may not understand the way the people in that community, you know, their behaviors, their mannerisms. So, you know, you might walk up to a scene and you see two people arguing or speaking, and you don't realize, okay, maybe there's a little bit, you know, because people of color, you know, we get a little animated, we get loud, and it's like they're not really being hostile or violent. That's just how we are as people. But if you don't understand that about us, then you might take it and be like, okay, he's being aggressive, he's going to be a threat to me. Whereas if we start, you know, to get more diversity on these police forces, I think a lot of it starts with, you know, within some of our communities, we automatically view police as enemies. So we raise our children, oh, the police don't talk to police, don't snitch, don't this like that. So the police being enemies, a lot of young people are growing up, you know, with ambitions of getting into law enforcement. To say like, okay, well, you know what, why can't I be a cop? Why can't I be a detective? Why can't I be in the FBI? Because it's like, that's like joining the enemy. So again, as they were speaking about, if we, you know, have more communication, like you were saying, like, you know, get leagues together, get the police to interact with the community and see like, okay, the people in the community aren't that bad, the police aren't that bad, and then maybe younger people will look, you know what, maybe I want to get into law enforcement, and then we'll have more diverse police forces, so when things, you know, issues in the community come up, when the police officers get there, they have more of an understanding of, okay, the people that they're dealing with, this is how they are, this is how we need to handle it, rather than just going in there like, okay, I'm not sure how these people act, so I'm going to be more on edge.
All right, Frederick, thanks so much. Now we have our first audience member. Can we have a big round of applause for our first? Can you come over here, sir? Thank you very much. What is your name and where are you from?
Marcus Coleman from Atlanta, Georgia.
All right, and what is your question for the panel?
I have a two-part question. First, I'm so glad to hear his response, because that video was leaning to more so that we're responsible for getting shot down.
You're talking about Frederick's?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm glad to hear his diversity reaction. My question is this: with the recent events, and we've named them over and over again, Eric Gardner, Michael Brown, I want to thank Attorney Crump for taking on those cases, but we have a movement of Black Lives Matter, and it's not just police brutality being shot down in the street, it is also the corruption within the police departments with botched investigations. We have the parents of slain Kendrick Johnson from Valdosta, Georgia. My question is this, two parts. Number one, the grand jury process seems to deal us a bad blow in the black, brown, and low-income communities. So number one, do you think the secret grand jury proceedings when it deals with law enforcement is fair? Number two, I spoke about the Black Lives Matter movement. You have a group of people that are rallying, that are marching, that are in support of lives that have been lost. Do you think it is productive, or should I say counterproductive, for the protesters to be protested against? Meaning, in Washington, D.C., right here, I believe there was a march this past weekend, Sea of Blue, where you have rhetoric such as, for the Al Sharptons of the world, for the Eric Holders of the world, and the race baiters, we will outnumber you and we will outmobilize you. Do you think that is counterproductive as we sit here on King's National Holiday discussing race relations, when those of us are protesting for Black Lives Matter, for Brown Lives Matter, but it seems to be a draw in the sand when it comes to law enforcement.
All right. It also seems to occur in the Hispanic community, looking at some of the statistics. So let me throw this question out first to you, Benjamin Crump, if you could, and then we'll just take it from the rest of the panel. That was a very good question. Thanks so much. You can take your seat. You can do whatever you want. This is a free country. Let's make sure that seat is comfortable. If it's not, you call me. I know the people who can make it better. Mr. Crump.
As the attorney on the panel, that was a very good question, Marcus Coleman, because I do think transparency is the key. People have to see in the community that they get justice too. And when they don't see they get justice like everybody else gets justice, they feel they have to turn to different motives to achieve justice, whether it be protesting, and unfortunately some even turn to anger and violence, as Bernice King spoke of. And as a lawyer, and I've talked about this with Michael Brown's case, I represent his family as the lead attorney, Tamir Rice's case in Cleveland, Ohio, the 12-year-old who was killed on the playground, and that video is still very difficult to watch. I have been pushing that we got to get away from these secret proceedings that always exonerate the police officer for killing Black and brown life, especially men and boys. And we have to say our Constitution in America says we are entitled to a trial by jury, and it's supposed to be transparent so we know it works for everybody. And we can accept it a lot better when we see, no matter what the outcome is, just that you had a fair chance at justice. It's this whole concept called due process of the law. This notion that the law and the legal proceedings are supposed to be fair for everyone. And when we don't see that, people stop believing, they stop trusting, and they don't think that they're part of the American society, and they're on the outskirts of it. And so we need thought leaders to step up and do just what Dr. Carson suggested. We have to get to know one another, not when the first thing is a criminal allegation. That's the first time many young people see police officers. So if that's the first time, why would they want to be a police officer when their first interaction with them is one that you're going to dehumanize me?
That's a very good point. We want to continue on that with the other panelists, but first let's go back to Jumi Alabanji at our social media desk. We understand we have more questions coming from coast to coast. Jumi, what are you finding?
Well, Jeff, we absolutely do. Just received this tweet within the past couple of minutes from @Delane the Brain. She is watching us live in Worthington, Ohio. Her question for the panel this evening, Jeff, why is it that when black people protest and riot, they are often called thugs? She's using the hashtag Your Voice, Your Future. Keep on sending in those questions, Jeff. But she wants this question answered by the panel.
All right, Jimmy, thanks so much. A lot of people are called thugs, and they seem to be part of the crime that goes international. It goes viral. Trayvon Martin, the hoodie. You had a gentleman in Ferguson with cigars. You had a gentleman who couldn't breathe in New York City who was selling untaxed cigarettes. Now, I don't know whether that is really defined as a thug, but I certainly don't believe it warrants killing. We all make mistakes. We're all human. We're all flawed human beings. I think in the Ferguson case, and I'm not sure, Mr. Crump, you know way more about this than I do, it seemed as though he was coming back after Darren Wilson, Mr. Brown, and that's why that was done. But
the facts are going to come out on that.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to hearing them. What I'd like to do is toss this to Patricia Guadalupe. What are you seeing in the Hispanic community and also the black community?
Well, I mean, in the Hispanic community in particular, these kinds of situations happen a lot more often than you think. But the problem is that they're not covered as much, because one of the issues that even as a journalist I have with some of my fellow colleagues in the media is that, you know, we don't have a lot of people of color in the newsrooms that are making the decisions of what is to be covered or not. And so when you have people that don't identify with the community, don't know the community, you know, they go that stereotypical route. I mean, when Ohio State won the national championship, there were tons of fires in Columbus, Ohio, kids running all over the place. I mean, I would call that a riot. A bunch of people were arrested, but it looked like, you know, to the average person on TV, oh, well, there's just a bunch of kids having fun. And I think that that's part of the problem, is that when you don't have people in the news media, in decision-making positions that tell you this is what we need to cover and this is how we're supposed to be covering it, then you go down that stereotypical route, and that's been a problem in how a lot of these issues are covered.
It's a slippery slope. Now, Frederick, when I watched your entire video like 5 times, you were saying that sometimes those who are killed by the cops are considered victims, and you said in your video, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, that's why you're here, but you basically said you knew it was wrong to steal. You knew it was wrong to approach a police officer. You knew this, you knew that. So how do you respond to a question like this, that they were thugs or that they were not thugs? They were people who were making mistakes like we all do. Like I said, we're all flawed. But at the same token, you were saying, you know what? Yeah, you were the victim, but what were you doing there in the first place? And correct me if I'm wrong. That's what I got from your video anyway.
Oh, no, that's pretty much correct. But in that instance, I was speaking of the people dealing with things that were actually guilty, not necessarily, you know, in situations with, you know, Eric Garner or Mike Brown, things like that, where, you know, again, the facts still need to come out. But in situations where, you know, you're clearly a suspect, and of any color, black, white, brown, Hispanic, anything like that, if you're in the wrong and you decide to attack an armed police officer and that police officer pulls his weapon to shoot you, well, that's kind of a lack of common sense. But going back to the thug thing, I really have a problem with this word. I believe it was Richard Sherman for the Seahawks. He said last season, the season before that, it's kind of become the new socially accepted N-word. And as she was saying, like, you know, you see with the Ohio State things, a lot of sports celebrations, oh, it's just kids out there, they're celebrating, they've taken it too far. But then again, when you see people of color out there doing it, oh, it's automatically the first thing they want to do, oh, he's a thug. He's a thug. And it's like, is he really a thug? Or maybe was he in a bad situation, something like that. But again, Richard Sherman himself, he was called a thug. That man is Stanford educated, a highly successful man, very well spoken.
We don't need another N-word.
Yeah, and he's like, he's not a thug, but as soon as he does see something and he acts out, as a black man, the first thing we want to do is call him a thug. So I'm like, that word is kind of getting a little bit slippery right there, because again, it seems like it's kind of becoming the socially accepted word, the N-word. Like, again, like just to dismiss us, oh, black people acting up, oh, they're just a bunch of thugs.
I remember hearing that in the media a long time ago, and what I want to do is I'm sorry, just for a second.
I got to say this, it's real troubling when you really think about it, because you had the Colorado theater shooting, you had what happened in Newtown. They killed massive numbers of people. They were all taken alive. But when you see young black and brown boys as cigarettes, it's anything. I mean, they're shooting and killing us. And you got to say, we got to stop this. It's an epidemic. And when they look at it, the white children are doing the same thing the black children are doing, but they get to live. There's no street justice right down the corner. They get to come to court. So we got to say America is America for black and brown children too, just like it is for white children. And we don't want street justice. We want justice in the courtroom, not some police who's probably not trained in many instances, making the decision on the street to be judge and jury, saying he's a thug or he's whatever, and I got a right to kill him because I'm probably going to get away with it, and there's nothing to deter me. We got to change that.
Dr. Benjamin Carson, I'm sorry, I just wanted to get the Benjamin Carson's, your response to what you've heard so far in the last 5 minutes, sir.
Well, first of all, somebody has to speak up for the police. And I got to tell you, if there were no police, think what your life would be like. People would walk in your house and they would say, I like that TV. I think I'm going to take that. Oh, better still, you get out. I'm taking your house. You know, and, you know, when we were offering condolences, you know, there were a couple of New York police officers that were killed also. So, you know, let's not dichotomize and make it sound like all the problems are in one area. We have problems throughout our society. We're not going to solve those problems again, unless, as I said, we're willing to admit some fault on both sides and are willing to really sit down and have an in-depth discussion. But most importantly, we must get to know each other.
I think the most healthy thing we can realize is that we're all flawed. We are all human beings. We are all going to make mistakes in our life. How can we even the playing field between the races, the religions, and on and on and on. The sexes, we could even bring that in, but that's another town hall meeting. I have a very brave audience member coming over here, and what is your name?
Lakeela Stemmons.
Okay, and where are you from?
Fairfax, Virginia.
Fairfax, Virginia, and you have a question.
I do. I have a question and somewhat of a statement. Thank you for
Why don't you give the statement first, and we'll have a question second. What do you
I think this is an amazing opportunity. It says your voice, your future. However, my just blanket observation, with the exception of Attorney Crump, is that you're missing young leaders who have been leading the movement since Trayvon Martin. I don't see anyone on your panel that is young, and you have Philip of the Dream Defenders, you have Erica who is leading DC Ferguson, you have Tamika who's in New York with the New York Justice League, you have Janae Ingram with the National Action Network, and they're not present. So how are you having a conversation about race relations and you do not have a young leader who's actively a part of the movement?
You know what, can I answer that very briefly?
Sure.
We're going to have ongoing town hall meetings about this, and if you give us those names, we'll have them at the town hall meetings, I guarantee you. I promise you that, because this is not our first town hall, and I can guarantee it's not going to be our last town hall.
Us old people will probably be dead by then.
But now let's get your question.
And so my question
I'm not that old.
My question is that
Being called old, I mean, I got some grade. But
Here's the question from our audience member now.
you have a younger generation who feels isolated, who feels like they are being excluded, or they don't have a seat at the table. How do you include them? Because if they see this tonight, it's like the same thing over and over.
Good question.
Because you're not on the front lines and they are. With the exception, again, of Attorney Crump.
Those young people really are the hope for America. And I thank you so much for that question, Lakeela, because I do think, Dr. Carson, they feel a lot of people speak up for the police, and nobody speaks up for them. And so that's what they're frustrated about. And these young people, when we really think about it, they're the hope, because we're going to, as you said, we're going to be gone, and they're going to have a profound effect on what happens going forward, Fred, because if we don't include them, if we don't make them feel that they are important and they continue to be marginalized, we're going to see this happen over and over again. So when we get these thought leaders, we need to have a foundation of some sort where we have young people sitting at the table with police leaders, athletic league leaders, when we go into the community, to not only talk about sports, but to talk about education and what do I bring to the table? Why do you value me as a citizen? Because the question is, do some police officers have that culture sensitivity training where they do value young black and brown people, and they don't look at them all as thugs? Because I will tell you, they have tests out there when they put up the images and they see how fast they shoot at black and brown figures versus what they shoot at white figures. And a lot of it is the media. Let's be honest about it. The negative portrayals of blacks and Hispanics are rampant, and we got to say, we got to stop that. We got to portray outstanding African Americans, outstanding Hispanic citizens, as much as we display all these negative images. And you know that better than anything, because you don't have to tell us. We see it every day we turn on the TV.
And Mr. Crump, if I could just add too, I don't know who it was among you in the panel, you made a great observation. We're not bashing the police force, we're not bashing law enforcement, we're questioning some of the systems, the grand jury systems and whatnot. Officers Wenjen Liu and Rafael Ramos were working overtime in Brooklyn, New York City at the end of last year when they were shot point blank in the head by a lone gunman, Ishmael Brinsley, 28, who killed himself at a train platform when he realized that the police were closing in on him. It turned out he also killed his girlfriend in Baltimore. They were killed because they were wearing police uniforms. They seem to have the same racial makeup as the neighborhood they were protecting. So I don't know whether that was an exceptional case or something that we also have to delve into and wonder, geez, does do the police really have to look like the community they serve? I just wanted to bring that up because, and I'd love to hear from social media from any law enforcement official out there if they can give us an explanation, because we are trying to get closer to the truth.